Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name's Beth. If you're new, welcome. Today I'm going to be quilting this really cute baby quilt. I used 5 fat quarters, just 4 or 5 squares from each fat quarter. I do have a video I will leave linked below when I made the quilt top, and today I'm going to be quilting the quilt. Let's get started. Here's my quilt top on the table with some batting pieces, and my batting pieces are not quite big enough, so I thought that I would try piecing them together with a zigzag stitch. Most of my machines do not have a zigzag option. This is a new to me machine, handed down to me from a friend, and I am just learning how to use this very fancy machine. It has a lot of options, and I thought today I would try that zigzag stitch and see how it goes on my new machine. Like I said, I am getting used to this machine and all the buttons and whistles, and so I did struggle getting started, but once I got going, it was just fine. I had to make only 2 seams, so it was the perfect kind of project to do a little practice sewing with this machine. When I had put in the zigzag stitches and I used the edge of the batting, I tried to use the edges that were very straight. I still had some gaps, but when I put the quilt top together, the gaps will not be showing and the batting will come together just fine. Nobody will ever know that I pieced that batting together. And I'm using 505 spray like I often do when I'm making my quilt sandwich. I spray just a light spray on the batting, and then I smooth the quilt top over that batting, and then I do the same thing on the back. Here's the backing fabric that I had in my stash, and again, this is a sheet. I used 2 different sheets on this quilt. The background fabric on the front, the blue background fabric, is a cotton sheet, and this really cute fabric on the backing here was a sheet, a cotton sheet, and I love using sheets. They're nice and big, and I can usually do quite a bit of sewing just using one sheet. I have used this sheet before on another quilt. I think it was another baby quilt backing, and I have enough for this one as well. I'm going to be putting quilting lines diagonally through my quilt. I won't need to do any marking because these squares are small enough for me to follow from corner to corner without marking, and I'll start somewhere in the middle and I'll sew through those squares using a stitch that's just a little bit bigger. On my machine it's I think a 3.5, and I do not use a walking foot with this machine. I think some machines you really do need to use a walking foot, but typically I do not need to use that with my Juki. I wanted to mention that at the end of the video, I'm going to leave a little button. At the end of the video, you will see something that says playlist for machine quilting. And if you push that button for the playlist, you will see all the videos that I've made so far. I have quite a few videos where I have quilted a quilt using my sewing machine. They're all done just a little bit different. I don't do them the same every time, but for the most part, I use the spray and I use this sewing machine. After going one direction with my quilting lines, I double checked the back to see that everything was nice and smooth, and now I'm going to go the other direction, and I want to encourage you to continue to machine quilt. Sometimes you will have a little bubble on the back, you'll have a little pucker or something. Kind of depends on who you're giving it to. I have given away quilts that were not perfect, and it's a learning process. You know, you've got to make a lot of quilts before you're really proficient at machine quilting. At least that's what I have found. I'm trimming away the excess batting and backing, and I'll be adding binding using that same background fabric. I'm cutting my background fabric 2.5 inches, and as I mentioned, this is a sheet, so my strips can be really long, and I only needed 2 strips because this is, you know, typically you have a 40 to 45 inch width of fabric, and in this case the width is much wider and longer, so I only needed to cut 2 strips, which was really nice to only have those 2 seams. I'll have the seam that I joined the strips, and then the seam at the end that I'll show you how I do. I have my 2 long strips, and I'm going to be joining them together after I cut off that hem off the sheet. I'll put these pieces together, right sides together if you are using fabric with right side. This fabric, actually, I can go either way. It doesn't have a front or a back. And I'm going to go from corner to corner diagonally, and I'll cut off that excess triangle, and I'm going to press this long strip of binding in half. Once my binding was pressed, I turned my quilt upside down, so I'm going to be attaching the binding to the backing, leaving a tail of about 10 inches or so, and I'll put those raw edges, line up all the raw edges, and I'm going to sew along the side. And when I get to that first corner, I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch away from the corner and pivot and sew off the corner of the quilt, and then I'll show you how to fold that binding. So you can see I pivoted and I sewed off the corner of the quilt, and now I'm going to turn the quilt so I can work on the next side, and I'll lift my binding up, and then I'll fold it down right there on that corner seam and get a straight fold at the top. And now I'm going to start sewing right on that fold, and I'll do the same thing all the way around. I stopped sewing, I don't know, 12 or 14 inches away from where I started. I need a little room to work here, but I don't need too much room. I'm going to cut one of those binding strips off, but I need a tail on one of the sides. It doesn't matter if it's the right or left side. And now I'm going to measure using that leftover piece. It should measure 2.5 inches. So my folded piece there on the right is 2.5 inches, and I'm going to put right sides together, and I kind of need to bunch up the quilt so that I can get these 2 pieces of binding together. I'll pin, and then I will join them the same way that I joined the 2 pieces of binding, you know, when I started. Adding this seam is a little fiddly sometimes. It's not always easy to get it under your needle, but we were successful this time. And before I cut off those excess triangles, I always like to check and make sure that it fits on the quilt, because I can take out that seam if something's not quite right. And then I'll pin that area that hasn't been attached, and I will add the last bit of that seam around my quilt, and when I turn this over to the front, we won't be able to tell where the binding begins and where it ends. This is a continuous binding, I think it's called. I turned my quilt over and found a thread that sort of matches. This gray thread I think will be a good match to the fabric, the background fabric, the binding fabric there, and I'm going to just roll the binding to the front and top stitch all the way around. I love the way this little quilt turned out, and it was a really easy quilting project, just straight lines right through those squares. And I'll leave a link below with a playlist of other videos showing machine quilting, and I will also try to leave that here on the screen so that you can watch other quilts being quilted with the machine, and typically they're pretty simple. I don't do anything fancy, and I enjoy sharing them with you. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.